The Heian Era is one of the most important eras in Jujutsu Kaisen, but what exactly happens in it? How much do we actually know about this golden age? Is there any discernible story in this era if we compile all the information we have available to us? Well, it's not exactly an easy question to answer. In order to find out what happened in the Heian Era, we will need to delve into everything in the era, from the events we know to the developments made with Jujutsu to characters and their associations. And we need to start with what the Heian Era actually is. The Heian Era is an era of Japanese history spanning 400 years, from the late 700s to the late 1100s. In real life, this era was known for being a highlight of Japanese art and poetry, as well as being the era where katakana and hiragana were developed. It was also when Buddhism made large strides in establishing itself as a major religion within the region. The establishment of Buddhism is mirrored in Jujutsu Kaisen as Tengen bringing Jujutsu to Japan from where it originated, which was done by preaching the foundations of Jujutsu to anyone that would listen. This is what started Jujutsu society in Japan, and in turn created a golden age of Jujutsu, as the Heian Era is known for the creation and development of powerful and advanced curse techniques. This led to a lot of the strongest sorcerers in the series originating from this era. We'll be talking about them a little bit later. There are a number of factions in the Heian Era that are responsible for the sorcerers we see, so I want to talk about them first, such as the clans. There are a number of important clans in the Heian Era, but none of them are the big three clans of modern Jujutsu society. First and foremost, we have the Sugawara clan, which is named for its founder Sugawara no Furuhito. This clan would later be headed by Michizane no Sugawara, one of the big three vengeful spirits of Japan, who was a real person that lived during the Heian Era and was highly influential during his life as well. During the Meiji Restoration, after the Heian Era, the Sugawara clan split into 6 branches, with one of these branches being the real-life Gojo clan. That's right, the connection between Gojo and Sugawara isn't made up. It existed in real life too. During the Heian Era, the Sugawara clan led an offensive against Sukuna in conjunction with the Abe clan. This was of course not successful, but regardless, the Sugawara were seen as a somewhat influential clan. But there was a bigger, more important clan that really led the way in the Heian Era, the Fujiwara clan. In Jujutsu Kaisen, they are the ancestors of Yuta, and that bloodline connection to the Heian Era is part of what makes him so powerful. In real life, the Fujiwara clan actually existed as well. It was a powerful clan of nobles and actually dominated the political scene of Japan, specifically during the Heian Era. They established a hereditary claim to the position of regent, which would step in for the emperor if the emperor was ever unable to do their job. On top of this, consorts for the emperor were frequently Fujiwara women, meaning the Fujiwara clan heads were often the father-in-laws or grandfather-in-laws to the emperor. And it was Fujiwara clan tradition that children respect and take counsel from parental figures, even if they were only figures through marriage. This came to a peak with Fujiwara no Michinaga, who was so influential that he basically controlled Japan for his lifetime rather than the emperor. It's hard to say exactly what the Fujiwara's real-life influence means for the world of Jujutsu Kaisen, but there are a couple of things we can draw connections to. First of all, considering the Fujiwara opposed Sukuna and fought to defeat him, this likely means that the central Japanese government at the time saw him as a threat as well, and knew the existence of Jujutsu even back then. The clans seemed to want to control strong opposing forces, but lacked the power of Jujutsu to do so, and as a result, had to quell those with strength by offering them government positions, as we saw with Yozuru. Second, they seemed to employ mercenaries to help bolster their numbers. We can see this in the Sun, the Moon, and the Stars group headed by Uro, which worked with the Fujiwara to take down Sukuna, and they also employed the 5 empty generals. The reason I believe these are mercenaries or contracted sorcerers rather than members of the actual Fujiwara clan is because of the way Uro talks about herself and the Fujiwara, which we will delve into later, and because chapter 238 says both groups serve the Fujiwara rather than being a part of them. But that could also be like a translation thing. The only other clans we know for sure existed in the Heian Era in Jujutsu Kaisen are the Abe clan and Kamo clan. The Abe clan is the clan Angel belongs to. In the real world, they got into some drama with the Fujiwara clan during the Heian Era because they stopped paying taxes to the local Kyoto government. But besides that, we don't know much about this clan, and we know almost nothing about their role in Jujutsu society either, besides that they allied with the Sugawara to fight Sukuna, ultimately losing. We also don't know much about the Kamo clan. In the real world, it existed even prior to the Heian Era, but it's hard to say exactly what role it had in Jujutsu Kaisen's Heian Era, as there's no mention of it prior to Kenjaku's Noritoshi Kamo. Considering this clan is one of the big 3 clans, I would expect it to exist in the Heian Era, but we don't know what capacity it existed in. And as far as I could tell, there's no real-world equivalent to the Zenin clan or the Inumaki clan. They appear to be completely made up for the world of Jujutsu. So those are all the clans we know existed in the Heian Era, but there's still a lot of information about the Heian Era we have to cover. ever, such as advancements made in Jujutsu and a whole lot of characters. Let's start with the characters. There are 6 characters that we know of from the Heian Era, 7 if you count Tengen, although technically he predates the era. The most important figure introduced in this era is debatable, but it's either Kenjaku or Sukuna. I know it might sound weird to say the most important figure from the Heian Era isn't the strongest sorcerer of all time, but considering Kenjaku lived for 1,000 years and was Kenjaku for that time, I don't think it's totally inaccurate. Kenjaku is, without a doubt, the character from this era that has influenced the main series of Jujutsu Kaisen the most, and might be the most influential character from this series bar none. In spite of this, we don't know exactly what Kenjaku did in the Heian Era, but we know he was behind a lot of the advancements in Jujutsu that took place at this time, in particular the creation of barrierless domains and later domain amplification. Kenjaku's most notable achievement in the Heian Era was starting the ritual for the culling game. This is another aspect we don't know a ton about, but the earliest sorcerer to partake in the culling games was Uro, who was from this era, meaning he was working on the games and knew his end goal for around 1,000 years. The way he survived these 1,000 years was solely because of his curse technique, body hopping, which allows him to switch from one body to another, allowing him to extend his life. This technique also allows him to use the curse technique of the body he currently inhabits, as well as the technique of the body he was in prior. While Kenjaku is one of the strongest sorcerers we see, we don't actually know how strong he was in the Heian Era, as that was prior to him gaining 1,000 years of combat experience, and he also likely did not have curse spirit manipulation in this era unless there was some crazy coincidence. That's not to say he was weak in the Heian Era, more so that he just didn't have the strength that we know him for. However, every other sorcerer from this era is clearly quite strong and was strong in their era as well, such as Uraume. But before we get into them, please consider subscribing. We are getting so close to 100,000 subscribers, so if you want to be able to say you are here before 100k, this is pretty much your last chance. Only 10,000 people in the entire world will be able to say that, so your chance to be one of those people is kind of slipping away quickly. Plus, subscribing really helps out the channel, and you obviously like the content as well, so what reason do you have not to? Uraume is essentially a lackey for Sukuna. They prepare everything the king needs, from meals to baths to deliveries. They're actually one of the only people in the series Sukuna seems to care for, if not the only person, and it seems even back in the Heian Era they were quite close. The exact nature of this relationship is ambiguous, but the ending of Jujutsu Kaisen makes it seem like there's some sort of father-daughter thing going on here. This would align with Uraume's concern for Sukuna in pretty much every aspect that they can be worried about him. Basically, it seems to be more than just a professional relationship. Part of what makes Uraume so useful to Sukuna is their ability Ice Formation, which allows them to create ice particles from cursed energy which can then be manipulated at their will. We see this used primarily to freeze opponents and create sharp ice spikes for combat, but she can also create this giant ice sphere which does something and also commit suicide. This ability was useful to Sukuna because it allowed the cannibal to preserve meat in a much more effective way by freezing it. Another person close to Sukuna was Yozuru, kinda. She thought she was close to Sukuna, but the feeling didn't seem all that mutual. Yozuru herself seems to be considered a hick by traditional Japanese society, yet despite this, she was given a high-ranking position in the central government in Kyoto. This seems to be because of some rampage she pulled at some point in time, but we don't know exactly what this was. We do know that it likely happened prior to the Fujiwara assault on Sukuna, as the harvest festival she partook in was after they had lost. What's kind of interesting is even for the Heian Era, Yozuru seems quite strong with her construction technique. While this technique has been described as being inefficient in cursed energy usage, Yozuru was able to work around this thanks to her ability to output high amounts of cursed energy and her unique inspiration for energy efficiency. She found inspiration in insects thanks to their ability to carry multiple times their weight and fly insane distances with tiny bodies. These two aspects allowed her to create her liquid metal, which in turn would allow her to create an insect carapace, which was her main object of construction. She was also of course able to use the liquid metal in combat as well, and she could of course create Perfect Sphere, which was essentially the best possible technique for her liquid metal, as it exerted infinite pressure, meaning it could destroy anything it came in contact with. Another gal from the Heian Era is Uro, who plays a much smaller role in the era than the previous sorcerers. Uro was a captain of the Sun, the Moon, and the Stars squad, a supposedly elite squad in the Heian Era that was allied to the Fujiwara. Together, they launched an assault on Sukuna along with the Sugawara forces. As we already established, this assault was, of course, unsuccessful. In her reincarnated form, Uro held a lot of hate for the Fujiwara despite being allied to them in her past life. We don't know exactly what the reason for this was. It could be because of their loss to Sukuna, or due to the clan's government branch being willing to bend their knee to sorcerers like Sukuna and Yozuru, or it could just be some inferiority complex that she's projecting on others because of her own failings as a sorcerer. We just don't know, but to me, these are the three most likely options. Uro makes use of the sky manipulation technique, which allows her to treat the sky as a surface, manipulating it by bending and breaking it. She can also use this technique to fly. There's also a small possibility that Uro might have been somewhat allied to Tengen, as her group, the Sun, the Moon, and the Stars, bears a resemblance to the religious group that worshipped Tengen, the Star religious group, but this was never confirmed. Anyway, I don't really have a good transition here, so let's just move on to Angel. Angel is the character from the Heian Era that we know the least about. We know she was part of the Sugawara clan in their offense against Sukuna, but honestly, that's all we know about what she did in the Heian Era. Pretty much all we know about her is her curse technique, which is technique extinguishment, which allows her to stop any curse techniques she uses her technique on. We mainly see this used in the form of Jacob's Ladder, which is a large beam of light that descends from the sky, but it also seems to be a technique that she can use on herself as well, as she and Hannah were able to freely pass between the barriers of the Culling Games by negating their effect. This was done without destroying them, so I don't think she used Jacob's Ladder on them. One of the most fascinating aspects of Angel is that she has some belief of God, which she used to create a moral code that she follows closely. We don't know the exact tenets of this system of belief, but one is that one soul cannot suppress another's. This is why she takes on a symbiotic relationship with Hannah in the modern era, and why she seeks to exterminate all the reincarnated sorcerers. Because of her title with Angel and her relationship with God and just a general religious vibe in general, some fans believe she might have had a role in creating the inverted spear of heaven, as the curse tool also has a similar effect to her technique when it is used. Beyond that though, there isn't much we know about Angel, so let's move on to her penultimate sorcerer, Tengen. Kinda. See, Tengen isn't from the Heian Era. They actually predate the era, but they're still incredibly important to the golden age of Jujutsu, as it was Tengen that preached the foundational teachings of Jujutsu, essentially creating a culture of Jujutsu that directly led to the golden age of Jujutsu. Tengen is a bizarre and complicated figure in the context of the main Jujutsu Kaisen story, and like most of the sorcerers we've talked about today, we don't know exactly what their role in the Heian Era was. They're known mainly for their barrier techniques, being the best barrier user in the history of Jujutsu and creating a number of barriers around Japan that aided in the suppression of cursed spirits and the stabilization of cursed energy. Their curse technique is immortality, which is what allowed them to live for so long, but their immortality comes with a catch. Tengen doesn't stop aging, they're just incapable of dying from old age. This means that as their body ages, they lose their physical human resemblance, and every 500 years, they must absorb a plasma star vessel in order to maintain their humanity. If they do not do this, they will evolve into a cursed spirit. We saw this happen and also saw them die as a cursed spirit, but apparently even after their death, their barriers can maintain stability for some reason. Before we move on, I want to quickly theorize about exactly when Tengen brought Jujutsu to Japan, because I don't think it immediately led to a golden age of Jujutsu. See, the Heian Era spans 4 centuries, and when we hear people talk about Kenjaku or Sukuna or other sorcerers, they always say they're 1,000 years old. While this would put those sorcerers in the Heian Era, there are still 300 years unaccounted for in the era. So my theory is that Tengen brought Jujutsu to Japan early in the Heian Era, and then over the course of 300 years, it developed into a golden age. And that golden age is where all the sorcerers we know came from. It also wouldn't make a ton of sense for Tengen to bring Jujutsu around and then just start a golden age immediately, you know? Jujutsu is a skill as much as it is a tool, and it would take the sorcerers a long time to gain an understanding of it. And that finally brings us to the man they were all chasing, Sukuna. Being the strongest sorcerer of the era and all time, Sukuna played a huge part in the Heian Era. How huge? Well, we don't know. As we already established, it appears that, for whatever reason, he was in opposition to the central government of Japan. This could be for a number of reasons, but the main one is likely his ideology. Being the strongest and believing himself to be the strongest, Sukuna didn't want to bow to anyone. He wanted to live the life he wanted, with no concepts of rules or morality, just consuming who he wants as he pleases. The other big reason he could oppose the central government is that he might have been shunned to it due to his deformities. It's kind of ambiguous, but it seems part of his motivation for his lifestyle was revenge on those who scorned him. He says revenge and his lifestyle are the same, and that alone would give him plenty of reasons to oppose the central governing force. As far as we know, the only person he associated himself closely with was Uraume, as he appeared to care for them even in death, but we don't know exactly what his connection to Uraume Uraume is. He did also have some connection to Kenjaku at some time, as Kenjaku was the one that taught Sukuna the secret to the barrierless domain, as well as how to preserve his life in the form of cursed objects, aka Sukuna's fingers. But I don't think I would really call them friends. They don't really give off the vibe of friends like many other Jujutsu Kaisen characters do. They seem to be much closer to coworkers than anything else, only working together for the same underlying goal. Besides these two, Sukuna only seemed to know the other people from the Heian Era as opponents, with Uro, Angel, and Yozuru all challenging him and all ultimately losing. In this era, Sukuna made use of multiple tools to maintain his position at the top. First of all is his curse technique Shrine, which consists of 2 slashing attacks, as well as his fire arrow, which can do massive damage when used in his domain. He also has 4 arms and multiple deformities as the result of eating his twin in the womb. It's unclear if this is also the reason for his abnormally large cursed energy pool. The extra arms allow him to use 2 cursed tools at once, those being Kamotoke and Hiten. Kamotoke is a baby rattle thing that can shoot electricity, and Hiten is a trident, but we don't know exactly what it does because we never actually saw it in action. One interesting tidbit about Sukuna is that apparently in the Japanese version, he speaks quite fondly of his mother when mentioning her that one time. I don't really know what to make of this, so let me know what you think of it in the comments down below. So, with all that information all the way, here is the story that we can piece together for the Heian Era. At some point in the Heian Era, Tengen brought the foundations of Jujutsu to Japan. This led to the golden age of Jujutsu, creating many strong sorcerers and many flourishing techniques. The Fujiwara in control wanted to maintain their hold on the central government, but felt threatened by this new power, as they did not have the strength to oppose the likes of Sukuna or even Yozuru. After Yozuru went on a rampage, she was given a luxurious position in the central government in order to keep her satiated and under control. The Fujiwara tried to defeat Sukuna as well, but failed in this front too, even with the help from the Sun, the Moon, the Star Squad, and the Sugawara and Abe clans. After this, Sukuna was essentially a roaming warlord, taking food from whoever he wanted as no one could oppose him. At some point, he became allied to Kenjaku in order to preserve his own life, and in doing so, learned how to transfer himself into cursed objects so he could later be reincarnated. While all of this is going on, Kenjaku is making contracts with people so they can get reincarnated into the Culling Games, with Yozuru and Uro doing so to fight again, and Angel doing so to get revenge on Sukuna. Uraume also agreed to some kind of binding vow for reincarnation, but it was different as she was awoken much earlier before the Culling Games started. They did this in order to support Sukuna when he returned. The Heian Era ends with the collapse of the Fujiwara clan and the movement of the capital of Japan from Kyoto to Tokyo, and the establishment of the first shogunate. And that's pretty much it. Yeah, I wish we got a bit more of a story too, but it kind of is what it is. Feel free to let me know any comments or details I might have missed in the comments down below. And while you're down there, be sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot to me as always. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon for our next video.